Welcome to The Rational Historian, where power, history, and human decisions collide, and where the past is rarely as simple as it first appears. When most people learn about the beginning of World War I, they hear a very simple story: a single assassination. One gunshot in a European city. And suddenly, the entire world goes to war. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in war. The explanation seems almost absurdly simple. A terrorist attack leads to global conflict. But history rarely works that way. Wars of that scale do not begin because of a single bullet. They begin because systems are already under pressure. The assassination in Sarajevo did not create World War I. It exposed a political structure that had become dangerously fragile. To understand how the war actually began, we need to step back, not days, but decades. Because by 1914, Europe had become the most heavily armed and politically tense region on Earth. For nearly half a century, the continent had experienced what historians sometimes call armed peace. Major powers avoided direct war, but they were preparing for one constantly. Armies expanded, military budgets surged, naval fleets grew larger every year. Germany and Britain entered an intense naval arms race, each building increasingly powerful battleships. France rebuilt its military after its humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Russia modernized its army while expanding influence in Eastern Europe. Austria-Hungary struggled to maintain control over a diverse empire filled with nationalist tensions. Every power feared falling behind the others. This created a dangerous dynamic. Military planning began to dominate political thinking. Generals designed elaborate mobilization plans that could move millions of soldiers within days. Railways were mapped. Timetables were calculated down to the minute. Entire strategies depended on speed. And once these plans began, they were almost impossible to stop. Europe was becoming a system where mobilization itself could trigger war. But the deeper tension came from nationalism. Across Europe, populations increasingly believed that their nation deserved greater power, territory, and prestige. Nowhere was this more explosive than in the Balkans. The Balkans were often described as the powder keg of Europe, and for good reason. The region sat at the intersection of collapsing empires. The Ottoman Empire had ruled much of the Balkans for centuries, but by the late 19th century, its control was weakening rapidly. As Ottoman authority declined, new nations began to emerge. Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece all sought independence and expansion. At the same time, Austria-Hungary feared that rising Slavic nationalism could tear its empire apart. Millions of Slavs lived inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, particularly in Bosnia and Croatia. If nationalism spread too far, the empire could fracture. This created a direct conflict between two ambitions. Serbia wanted to unite Slavic peoples into a larger state. Austria-Hungary wanted to prevent that from happening. Both goals could not exist at the same time. By the early 1900s, tension between the two had become increasingly intense. Then, in 1908, Austria-Hungary made a move that dramatically escalated the situation. It annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. The territory had been administered by Austria-Hungary for decades, but it was still formally part of the Ottoman Empire. Annexation changed that. Bosnia now officially became part of Austria-Hungary. For Serbia, this was a disaster. Many Serbs believed Bosnia should eventually join a greater Serbian state. Instead, it had been absorbed by their rival empire. Resentment began to grow, not only among politicians, but among nationalist groups. Secret societies formed. Some of them were willing to use violence. Among the most radical was a group known as the Black Hand. Their goal was simple: destroy Austro-Hungarian influence in the Balkans and unite Slavic territories under Serbian leadership. By 1914, the political environment in the region had become extremely volatile. Nationalism was rising. Empires were nervous. Armies were prepared for conflict. All that was missing was a spark. And on a summer day in Sarajevo, that spark finally arrived. On the morning of June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand arrived in Sarajevo for an official visit. The trip itself was controversial. Bosnia had only recently been annexed by Austria-Hungary, and nationalist resentment remained high. For many Serbian nationalists, the Archduke's visit symbolized imperial domination. Several conspirators associated with the Black Hand decided to act. Their plan was simple, but dangerous. The attackers positioned themselves along the planned route. Each carried a weapon, bombs, pistols, or cyanide capsules, in case they were captured. The first attempt failed. One conspirator threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but the explosive bounced off the vehicle and detonated behind it, injuring several officers instead. The motorcade sped away. For most political leaders, this would have been the end of the story. Security would tighten. The visit would end. But a series of small decisions changed everything. Franz Ferdinand insisted on continuing the day's schedule. Later that morning, he decided to visit wounded officers in the hospital. His driver attempted to change the route to avoid the original streets, but the instructions were unclear. At one intersection, the driver made a wrong turn. The car slowed, then stopped directly in front of a young nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. Princip had already failed earlier in the morning. He had assumed the opportunity was gone. Now suddenly, the Archduke's car was just a few feet away. History often turns on moments like this. Unexpected, unplanned, almost accidental. Princip pulled out a pistol. He fired 2 shots. One struck Franz Ferdinand. The other struck his wife, Sophie. Both died within minutes. At first, the assassination seemed like a regional tragedy. Political violence was not uncommon in the Balkans. Assassinations had happened before. But what happened next transformed a local crisis into a global catastrophe. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for supporting the assassins. While the Serbian government was not directly responsible, elements within Serbian intelligence had helped train and arm the conspirators. Vienna now faced a choice: accept the assassination as a terrorist attack or confront Serbia directly. Many Austrian leaders believed the empire's survival required a decisive response. If Serbia continued encouraging nationalism among Slavic populations, Austria-Hungary itself could collapse. But there was a problem. Serbia was not alone. It had a powerful protector: Russia. Russia saw itself as the defender of Slavic nations across Eastern Europe. Culturally, politically, and strategically, Russia supported Serbia. If Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia, Russia might intervene. That possibility made Vienna cautious. So Austrian leaders sought reassurance from their most powerful ally, Germany. In early July 1914, Austria-Hungary consulted the German government about how to respond. Germany's Kaiser, Wilhelm II, offered strong support. Historians often call this the blank check. Germany essentially promised to back Austria-Hungary even if the crisis escalated into war with Russia. This commitment dramatically raised the stakes. Now Austria-Hungary felt confident enough to take aggressive action. On July 23rd, it delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. The demands were intentionally severe. Serbia was required to suppress anti-Austrian propaganda, dissolve nationalist organizations, and allow Austrian investigators to operate inside Serbian territory. Some of these conditions directly violated Serbian sovereignty. But surprisingly, Serbia accepted most of them. Diplomatically, this should have reduced tension. Instead, Austria-Hungary rejected the response as insufficient. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. At that moment, the conflict was still regional. But Europe's alliance system quickly pulled other powers into the crisis. Russia began mobilizing its army to protect Serbia. For Germany, Russian mobilization represented an existential threat. German war plans were built around a very specific strategy. If Russia mobilized, Germany had to act immediately. The famous Schlieffen Plan assumed Germany would face war against both Russia and France. Because Russia mobilized slowly, Germany planned to defeat France quickly first, then shift forces east. But that required attacking France immediately, which meant moving through Belgium. And that decision would bring Britain into the war. In early August 1914, Europe moved toward war with astonishing speed. Germany demanded that Russia halt its mobilization. Russia refused. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France. Then the German army began moving through Belgium as part of the Schlieffen Plan. Belgium was officially neutral. But German generals believed invading through Belgium was the fastest way to reach Paris. For Britain, this was unacceptable. Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality decades earlier, and strategically, it could not allow a single power to dominate the European continent. On August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany. Within days, the entire alliance system had activated. Europe's major powers were now at war, but none of them had originally planned for a global conflict. Each decision had been made in response to the previous one. Austria-Hungary wanted to punish Serbia. Russia wanted to defend Serbia. Germany wanted to support Austria-Hungary. France supported Russia. Britain intervened to protect Belgium and maintain balance in Europe. Each step felt logical to the leaders making it, but together they formed a chain reaction. A system of alliances designed to prevent war had instead made it inevitable. Within weeks, millions of soldiers were mobilized. Within months, the conflict spread beyond Europe. Colonies joined the fight. Empires collapsed. Entire economies shifted to war production. By the time the war finally ended in 1918, more than 16 million people had died, all triggered by a sequence of decisions that few leaders fully understood. World War I did not begin because one man fired a pistol. It began because Europe had built a political system so rigid, so militarized, and so interconnected that a single crisis could trigger catastrophe. The assassination in Sarajevo was not the cause of the war. It was the moment when decades of tension finally snapped. History rarely moves in straight lines. More often, it moves through fragile systems where small events reveal deeper fractures. And once those fractures appear, the outcome becomes almost impossible to control. Understanding this changes how we see history. World War I was not inevitable. But once the crisis began, the structure of European politics made stopping it extraordinarily difficult. Because sometimes history does not explode in a single moment. Sometimes it collapses through a chain reaction. And that is how a wrong turn in a Sarajevo street helped ignite one of the deadliest wars in human history. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to The Rational Historian, where we look beyond the headlines and uncover the deeper structures that shape history.